afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Secret Sunday session today. Today, I'm very pleased to have Brittany on today's session, who is a nutritionist. And in this session today, we're going to be talking about how women can fuel themselves appropriately to support their hormones and fertility, as well as when you are pregnant as well. So we're diving into very feminine energy and feminine space so that we can start that conversation around how you can best support your body during your different times in your life. First off, though, I'm going to turn to you, Brittany, and for those listeners that don't know who you are you and what is it that you do with yourself?
So I'm Brittany Darling. I'm a clinical nutritionist and I'm also the founder of One Fertility. So One Fertility is an online education platform, all things women's health, fertility, pregnancy and post-birth. I've been in clinical practice over 12 years now. Obviously, my areas of interest are all things fertility, pregnancy, post-birth, and just supporting women really on their journey through their reproductive years and supporting them through transitions as well.
Amazing. What a phenomenal space to be in. And it would be very rewarding as well as sometimes very challenging when you come across a lot of females that are struggling with their hormone health in general, which I want to dive into that straight away when we talk about a significant change in most young people's lives, but we'll be specific in terms of women, puberty. It's such a big change in a young female's life where they go through body changes as well as other emotional and mental changes can come along as well as that. When we look at nutrition, what role does that play during puberty?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So in terms of puberty, there's so many changes. There's so many hormonal fluctuations that happen, and that can bring up a whole heap of symptoms for people. It can bring up, hormonal acne. It can bring up bloating, digestive symptoms as you kind of settle into your cycle. I feel like there aren't many people who land with the perfect pain-free regular cycle, and so many teens struggle with irregular cycles, frequent bleeding, and a myriad of symptoms like painful periods and all sorts of things that can, when you think about it, they're your final years at school. Key for learning. You're trying to establish yourself socially and figure out who you are. It's such a curveball for girls and young women to have to navigate at that age. And nutrition can really help with that. So making sure you're getting those building blocks for your hormones and building blocks for all the things that your body needs. And I think the key thing when I think about teens or young women is that they're getting enough protein. So protein we get from meat, fish, eggs, legumes, nuts, seeds, things like that. Not only does protein help to balance blood sugar levels and keep blood sugar levels balanced, but they also contain micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals. Specifically, things like zinc are really in high demand for teens. But also these proteins are a rich source of iron. So if you're starting to menstruate and you're losing blood every month, you need to replace that iron because you lose quite a lot of iron through your monthly cycle, through your monthly menstruation. So your requirements do change at puberty, and it's important to cue into what those specific requirements are. But protein, getting enough protein would probably be my number one tip for, teens and young girls, and not young girls, young adults.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at the cycle, there is different phases that women go through. Is there certain requirements that are needed for each phase?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. And a lot of women are probably in tune with their cycle, and they recognize that at different phases of their cycle, they like to eat differently, or they have certain cravings for certain foods. So once you kind of map it out and recognize that, yes, there are different phases of the cycle, and this is how I feel during the cycle, you can really cue in and tailor your how you eat for each phase. So for example, in your menstrual phase, I would encourage people to eat warming foods, things that are blood building. So that might be, bone broths and stews, things that have spices like cinnamon or ginger. These are all really anti-inflammatory spices. Turmeric, for example, as well, to really help with any inflammation, which we know can be a huge trigger for menstrual pain for a lot of women, but also just staying warm and supporting that menstruation and supporting that phase, making sure you're getting enough iron to replace what you're losing as well is really important during that menstrual phase. So lots of nourishment, lots of deliciousness, taking it easy, especially with your exercise. And then as you start to go through your follicular phase, things can start building up again. So that's when you can start to do more movement. That's when you're going to be achieving some of your personal best in your follicular phase as you lead up to ovulation, because your hormones favor it. Women also find it easier to eat well during their follicular phase. So if they have any particular health goals, it's usually, this is the time where you don't have as many cravings for potato chips and chocolate. The follicular phase is where you can really hone in and focus on, your dietary goals, whatever they may be, eating enough fruits and vegetables every day, having that handful of nuts instead of the bag of chips, getting enough protein, eating your whole grains instead of grabbing a croissant. Those kinds of things, easier to achieve in the follicular phase.
Yeah, amazing. And I mean, you talk about cravings there. Why do they occur?
Yeah, so I just want to preface it, there's no such thing as bad food. If you really want to eat a bag of chips, eat a bag of chips. But if you're craving a bag of chips or a chocolate bar at 3 o'clock or whatever time it is after dinner or whatever it is every single day, your body's trying to tell you something. And usually, I look at, okay, what are you missing out on? Is it that you're not eating enough during the day? Is it that you've tried to intermittent fast? And I'm so not a fan of intermittent fasting, just to put that straight up there. It doesn't work for women. And yeah, there's just, I just think it's not what women need. Is intermittent fasting. So say you've done intermittent fasting in the morning, and then you've had, a salad for lunch, and then you hit 3 o'clock and all of a sudden you've gone through a whole family size bag of salt and vinegar chips. It's probably because you haven't met your caloric requirements and your body's just screaming out for, I need energy, I need calories. It could also be that your minerals are low, so you need more magnesium or more zinc. We know that the more stressed you are and the more exercise you do and the busier lifestyle that you lead, the more magnesium and also B vitamins that you need to support that busy, stressful lifestyle. So, it can be cravings for minerals. It could be that you're low on energy. So, and you could be low on energy, well, because you're not eating enough energy from your food, but also it could be something like an anemia, so a vitamin B12 deficiency, potentially an iron deficiency as well, and that's why you're not feeling, fully energized. So there's lots of different reasons why you crave food, but I always tell my clients to stop and think, what am I missing out on? And don't forget water, because sometimes a hunger cue can be hydration as well.
And you look at that information and there is so much information about what women should be eating, what they shouldn't be eating. There's even information about how they should be exercising and shouldn't, especially in tune with their cycles. And you look at fasting as well, it's definitely pushed on us, including women, that you should be doing this for your health or to lose weight. How is a young person, how is a woman supposed to know what is right for their body?
You don't. And even sometimes I get pulled into the BS as well. Like I'll see a fancy news article that's well written with beautiful pictures or even something on Instagram, and I read through it and I'm like, oh, that sounds great. Oh, this is the new thing. And then my professional brain kicks in and goes, hang on a second. Like I'm being sold something, or, there's something.
Yeah.
It's so tricky. Even I fall down that rabbit hole. So I guess I don't know what the answer to that question. I don't know how to answer that. You don't know, and it's such a minefield out there.
And I mean, you then as well go into the other area where a lot of females sometimes don't have quote unquote normal periods, where we don't even know what that looks like, but they have it irregular periods, or they miss periods, or sometimes women don't get periods. what would you class as a healthy period?
Look, periods are so different, and there's no such thing as the perfect 28-day cycle. So a normal cycle can range from anywhere from 21-day cycle all the way up to a 35-day cycle. So I think the most important thing is that there's a rhythm to it. It should be roughly the same amount of days every cycle. But certainly looking into your hormonal bloods as well can give clues as to whether there's something going on. Like, we can test hormones to see whether you're ovulating, and that can be a really good sign, especially if you're trying for a baby. But, checking whether you're ovulating, I kind of say ovulation is one of your, your vital signs, or it should be at least. So checking whether you're ovulating, checking your hormones, seeing where the balance is. There are a whole range of conditions that can cause irregular cycles or absence of cycles. So things like PCOS or hypothalamic amenorrhea. But there are so many other things. So I think it's important to check in with the healthcare practitioner. If your cycle isn't regular, or if you're experiencing changes, it can't hurt to investigate.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I agree with
And
that.
it's tricky on that as well. It's sometimes it can be really tricky to advocate for your own health. And sometimes it's so easy to be dismissed by your healthcare practitioner. Oh, that's normal for your age. Or, if your gut says there's something not right, just go to your doctor, advocate for yourself. And if they're not going to support you and believe you and order, the tests that are needed, change your doctor.
Yeah, it is very true. And I've heard many conversations where people do feel dismissed in that space. And it's really hard when you're battling against almost your intuition, but also having trust in those health practitioners. I want to get your thoughts then a little bit on the topic around contraception. It's like, it is a massive topic, and everybody has their own belief systems about it. But in terms of the body and how females can support their overall health, I think a lot of times women do really want to support their health, as well as using a safe method for contraception. What do you recommend, or is there ways that women can really support their bodies whilst using a particular method?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? It's so dependent on your life phase and a whole range of factors. So, I mean, abstinence is a great form of contraception. No. But yeah, I get it. I was on the pill for, I don't know, a gazillion years, 10, possibly more years, and put on the pill from a very early age, and it certainly did not agree with me. IUDs didn't agree with me either, and I know that there's so many other women out there that experience similar things. But for some women, these forms of contraception work perfectly fine for them, and it is a very, logical choice for their life phase. And so, I wouldn't say that all contraception is bad. It really depends on your individual needs and where you're at. And I'm a nutritionist, so I'm certainly not a medical doctor. So, advising on contraception is not really my area. But there are things that you can do while you are on contraception to support yourself nutritionally. So we know that the pill depletes things like zinc, folate, vitamin B6. So taking your pill alongside something like a multivitamin or even a prenatal multivitamin that has decent dosages of these specific nutrients can really help to support those depletions. We know that the pill also depletes the gut microbiome, and it can also alter the vaginal microbiome. So taking things like a probiotic can help to offset some of those side effects. If you've got a copper IUD, you may want to consider a zinc supplement. So there are things you can do. But in terms of natural forms of contraception, I think a lot of the apps can be inaccurate. Basal body temperature can be so variable. You can mess that up so much. Like, for instance, if you have a fever because you're coming down with something, or it's such a tricky one. You've really got to be a bit of a pro with monitoring your temperature. And I know there's some new devices that make it much easier. But yeah, it's just, it's great that it's a conversation, though. And it's great that we have options, but it would be also fantastic to have a male contraception.
Agree. It is. It's a big thing at the moment. And I even know, being in this space, how many young females even go, well, I don't want to tamper with my body or cause any long-term effects. And you're kind of stuck in the mud with this war almost in your head of what you do. But, you know, as you said, you kind of got to figure out what's right for you. But it's amazing that you can, even I didn't know those, like things like the pill do make you lose sort of those essential minerals and vitamins that you can find in other supplements, which is great. Looking at taking supplements, a lot of people are also skeptical about taking supplements because obviously sometimes it's not the natural source. But in saying that, you know, are we able to actually meet our daily needs of every single vitamin just purely by food?
No, unfortunately, food is not what it used to be. So I think iodine is a really good example of this. Iodine in supplements is a synthetic molecule. Our soils are really depleted, especially in Australia. So I see a lot of iodine deficiency clinically, and iodine deficiency in a woman who's trying to conceive, or, you know, say a woman who's pregnant, can lead to all sorts of complications for the pregnancy, but also long-term for bubs, brain development, nervous system development, thyroid development, et cetera, et cetera. And these can be permanent, irreversible consequences of this mineral deficiency. So I think that's a really good example of, you know, what we can't get from our food. So iodine is in things like seaweed, in seafood. We used to get it from dairy, but we don't anymore because they used to use an iodine wash to sterilize the stainless steel vats that they kept the milk in, but now they use some kind of chemical wash instead of iodine as a disinfectant. Other sources of iodine are things like iodine fortified foods or iodized sea salt, but most people are using fancy pink rock salt or Himalayan salt. They're not using the boring white iodized processed sea salt.
Wow.
So that's an example of, you know, why you have to supplement with something synthetic, because we're just not getting it from our diet.
Wow. It's incredible how the food industry has dramatically changed, and there's a lot more diverse products out there, and products that, yeah, once were the same, but now are processed a lot differently. Does that mean as well that will affect how a woman supports herself if she's wanting to conceive and have a baby?
Yeah, so that's why it's recommended that all women who are trying to conceive take 150 micrograms of iodine a day, and that they continue that through their pregnancy. And interestingly, post-birth, the requirement for iodine actually goes up even more than during pregnancy, because you need to then support your own thyroid health. So iodine is important for thyroid health because it's like one of the key molecules in your thyroid hormone. So in breastfeeding, you need enough to support your own thyroid health, but also for enough to come through your breast milk to support bubs' thyroid health, because they're not relying on circulating, you know, they're not in utero anymore, so they're not relying on your circulating thyroid hormones. They're producing their own, and they need iodine to do that.
Wow. Okay. So then we look at when a woman does fall pregnant, what during the phases of the trimesters, what's the sort of nutrients that they need for bub to be healthy and for mum to be healthy?
So it changes trimester to trimester. So if we start in very early pregnancy, even before you know you're pregnant, the requirement for folate is really high, and that's because it's required to for the development of the neural tube, but also for DNA and all sorts of other functions folate has, but in particular for the development of the neural tube, which is important to prevent things like spina bifida in our offspring. So that's why we fortify our foods with folic acid to help prevent or reduce the instance of neural tube defects. So for people who may accidentally fall pregnant or may not be taking a prenatal multivitamin, that's to protect that population. And then there's the recommendation that all women who are of reproductive age or trying to conceive, that they take 400 micrograms of folic acid every single day. And that's because by the time you find out you're pregnant, the risk reduction window for neural tube defects has ended. So the neural tube finishes developing by 6 weeks of pregnancy. So you ovulate. So your pregnancy dating starts with the first day of your last menstrual period. So by the time you ovulate, that's 2 weeks. By the time, this is for someone who has a normal 28-day cycle, or your average 28-day cycle, you ovulate, that's another 2 weeks. And you don't usually find out, a lot of women don't usually find out that they're pregnant until after that period. So you've got 2 more weeks after that where the neural tube continues to develop. And then after that, the risk reduction window is closed and folic acid, has done its job. And hopefully, you have a beautifully formed bubba with a gorgeous neural tube and no complications. But this is why a lot of the recommendations are prior to conceiving, because, those early days of formation are so important.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of information out there for mums, or for women that are pregnant, and saying, do this, do that, you need to go on this diet, you need to cut out this food. Is a lot of it BS, or is there information out there that is great for women, and where should they be looking? Who should they go to for help?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, on social media especially, there's not a lot of non-evidence-based information flying around. I think it's important to know, where you're getting your information from and who you're relying on to get your information from. There is a lot of robust evidence-based information, and I guess this is part of the reason why I started Day One Fertility. We've consolidated literally thousands of research papers and, evidence for all these phases. Everything we do is, 100% evidence-based, backed by science, et cetera, et cetera. And knowing that, you're getting information from someone who's qualified in that particular field as well. I think there's a lot, I love influencers. Don't get me wrong. I love looking at their pretty pictures. I love looking at their food inspo. I love following their travel journeys. I love all that. But, if you're talking about getting nutritional information, you really need to be seeking out someone who has the appropriate qualifications to be giving out that information. Yeah. And I think, that also leads into first trimester eating. We tend to not put too much pressure on the first trimester, because we're very, we do a big focus on preconception care and making sure you're nutrient replete going into pregnancy. So then when the morning sickness hits and you feel tired and you don't quite feel yourself and you're still kind of trying to hide your pregnancy from your work colleagues and nosy family and friends, that you can kind of go easy on yourself, knowing that you've done all the things in the lead up to getting your body prepared, and not feel guilty about not having the perfect diet, because you probably don't feel like eating salads and salmon in your first trimester. The reality is it might be peanut butter on toast, and that's absolutely fine. Whatever you need to do to get through. And then, at the same time, you're navigating pregnancy food safety as well in the first trimester and getting used to all the recommendations around that. And doing things just a little bit differently, just in a much, in a little bit of a safer way, to make sure that you don't get foodborne illness in your pregnancy. Because pregnancy is a time where your immune system is suppressed. That's normal. That's a normal part, adaptive part of pregnancy. So you can essentially carry a foreign body inside of you without your immune system attacking. So you are more susceptible to infections and, food poisoning and things like that. So, yeah, it can be tricky navigating food safety stuff as well. But that's certainly something that at Day One Fertility, we have nutrition for pregnancy course that helps you navigate all of that stuff and debunks all the myths and all the, hysteria and fear-based marketing.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much out there, and there's so much, I think, as well, that's telling you what you're doing wrong, instead of highlighting so many amazing things that you could just be trying to do day by day. And the sad thing is, you see so many people stress about it so much, of I've got to get it right, or I've got to have the best child, and I've got to support them the best way that I can. And sometimes that stress plays such a toll as well. And does that have an impact as well, that emotional stress that some mums can hold?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually quite a lot of evidence about stress in pregnancy and the long-term impacts on the baby. But at the same time, that this stress can pop up in pregnancy for a whole heap of reasons. But there are population-based studies, from history, times of famine, times of war, that have really demonstrated the long-term impacts that stress in pregnancy can have. Things like increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic diseases, obesity, etc., etc. Stress really does change and impact the epigenetic programming. So that's how the environment interacts with your genes, of your offspring. It reprograms.
Is that where as well pregnant women should also not do so much exercise as well because there's an added stress?
I don't think it's so much around added stress. I think for pregnant women and exercise, I'm not an exercise physiologist or a PT by any stretch of the imagination, but I think a lot of it's got to do with the hormones, relaxin. So, you become more flexible and it's easy to overextend. But I always say, for the most part, unless your doctor's advised you otherwise, you're generally fine to continue what you were doing previously. If that's what you're used to. But don't get heroic now that you're pregnant and decide to do, spin classes and take up running and doing crazy things.
Yeah, amazing. And then looking at postnatal, does nutrition play another role again on top of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And your requirements postnatally are really specific as well and are quite different from pregnancy too. So if you're breastfeeding, you've got an increased caloric requirement of around 700 to 800 calories a day. That's quite a lot of extra food. There's also the extra hydration component, the extra micronutrients that you need. So a lot of women who have just had a baby, they're like, finally, I don't have to take my prenatal multivitamin anymore. Either throw it in the bin or put it in the back of the cupboard next time. But actually, some of the micronutrient requirements, as I previously mentioned, are actually higher in breastfeeding than what they are in pregnancy. So iodine being the key one, vitamin B12 being really important as well. If you had a C-section, blood loss can be much higher in C-section deliveries than vaginal deliveries. So you want to make sure that you're staying on top of your iron levels, or even if you've had a postpartum hemorrhage and things like that, making sure you're getting enough iron, because iron's going to affect your energy levels and also your mood. And then the other one is vitamin D. So making sure, depending on where you live in the world, don't assume just because we live in Australia that you're getting enough vitamin D, because that's certainly not what I see clinically. Vitamin D is really important for mum's mood, for bone density. It's really important for immune regulation as well. And bub needs to either be getting enough vitamin D through mum's milk, so mum needs to be replete, or bub needs to be getting their own vitamin D, either through, very sensible sun exposure. We're not, tanning our babies, or in winter, I usually recommend a baby vitamin D supplement just as an insurance policy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how there are so many supplements out there, and I think I'm just going to quickly come back to that topic because it is such a big thing, and it's obviously in your practice you're recommending a lot, and it seems like it is very much needed. What are the main supplements that women should be looking at any time of their life, and no matter what phase they're going through? What is something that is going to improve their overall health?
Yeah, it's such a tricky one, right? Because it really depends on what's going on for that individual woman. But I mean, from a prenatal perspective, so planning for pregnancy and in pregnancy, everyone's kind of trying to find the perfect prenatal. And I always tell my clients, there's no such thing as the perfect prenatal. Like there are so many brands and there are so many good prenatals, but it's about navigating what your needs are and then having someone who's qualified recommend a prenatal that's going to meet your specific requirements. So for example, you may have just had an iron infusion because you've got chronic iron deficiency and low iron, you can just never seem to get it up with supplements. If you've just had a whole heap of iron, if I were recommending a prenatal multivitamin for you, I would be recommending either a prenatal with low iron content or no iron content. But also it would have to tick the other boxes for the iodine and the folates and the B12 and all the other things that we spoke about. So yeah, there's no perfect prenatal. It's about finding something that meets your individual needs. And then in terms of supplements in general, again, it comes down to your individual needs. Like me, for example, I take no supplements, like none. I am taking one at the moment. I'm taking some bromelain for tissue and wound healing because I just had a laparoscopy. But usually I take absolutely nothing because generally I don't have, I test my bloods regularly. I don't have any nutrient deficiencies and I don't have any specific requirements because I'm done having children and,
Yeah.
But it's so individual.
And I think that's where a lot of people, if they don't have any deficiencies, but they're hearing all these supplement talks, they're like, well, do I need to get on something to be quote unquote healthy and to be meeting every need to the best of my ability? And I think that's where it can get really confusing with some people because they don't know what to do when they have this intention of just wanting to be healthy. And then you hear that, food can't just do that. You can't meet your needs every day. They're like, what do I do?
Yeah. And that's why I always say test, don't guess. Test your levels, get professional advice, and really tailor that supplementation around what your needs are. And, your needs change seasonally. So in winter, you're going to need more vitamin D. But also if you go through a period of stress, that's where, you're supplementing with things like herbal adaptogens or nervine tonics that support your nervous system can really come into play. You're having sleep issues, if you're suffering from anxiety, something like saffron can be really helpful as well. So it really depends, but there are so many things and it's such a minefield.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it's just very important that you go to an expert. Don't use Dr. Google, don't use some influencer because it's just going to confuse you even more when you go to someone that you can trust that can, as you said, get you the tests that you need as well so you can understand your body. I think that's really important information.
Yeah, and understanding why you're taking something because consistency is key if you want to see a therapeutic result. So part of that is understanding why you're taking that, why are you taking the magnesium that's been prescribed? Why are you taking the multi?
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today and sharing a bit about your practice and also that amazing insight. Lastly, I just want to ask, what is your number one advice that you would give to someone that is probably at any stage, a woman that's just concerned about her overall health and just wanting support from a nutrition perspective?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Eat more at home.
I love that.
Yeah. 2 reasons. So plastic exposure, so BPA plastic exposure, which is an endocrine disruptor when you eat out. So we know that people that eat out, they have higher exposure to plastics, which messes with your estrogens and your hormones. And then the other reason is I think there's a microbiome element as well to eating at home. You're cooking with your hands, you're eating whole foods that are usually less processed. And we know that women, there was a study done on mothers. The mothers that cooked at home the most had the lower BMI. So we know it's also, really important for balancing a healthy weight as well. And again, meeting your micronutrient, your macronutrient needs. It's easier to balance at home than eating out. Mind you, don't get me wrong, love a pizza, love a meal out, all of that. It's all about balance. But cook more food at home, eat more home cooked food with the people you love.
Beautiful. Sounds amazing. Sounds like beautiful. Well, incredible. Thank you so much for jumping on today and sharing that with us. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Whole Food Healing. That's my personal Instagram profile. And then Day One Fertility is at Day One Fertility.
Beautiful. Well, everybody go check Brittany out. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today on another Secret Sunday session. And thank you as well to everyone who jumped on in and started this conversation with us.